I got a pretty shocking email the other day from someone who says they witnessed something bizarre and possibly covered up at a national park. Now, I want to be clear. I haven't been able to verify this story. There's no photo, no footage, just this person's account. But based on what they wrote and the details they included, I thought it was worth reading to you. So here's the message. You decide what to believe. Donovan, I had to write in. What I saw at Yellowstone last week, it shook me. We were out there for a short family trip. My kids had been begging to see the geysers and do the Junior Ranger program. Just one of those memory-making vacations you hope they'll look back on when they're older. But it didn't go the way I expected. It was Thursday, mid-afternoon, bright skies, a little wind. We were finishing up one of the shorter trails near the western side of the park, not too far from one of the main parking areas. That's when I first noticed it. Park rangers, a lot of them. I'd seen a few here and there throughout the week. You expect to, but this was different. There were at least 6 ranger vehicles pulled up onto the dirt shoulder, just off the main service path. Not the usual parked and walking around stuff either. These guys were clustered, tight. They were standing in a circle near the tree line, shoulders hunched, all talking low, like they didn't want anyone to hear them. One had a radio. Another kept glancing around like he was on lookout. My wife was ahead with the kids. I hung back, pretending I was tying my shoe or adjusting my camera strap or something. I just didn't want to pass them yet. Something felt off. Then I saw it. Out from the back of one of their trucks, a few of them pulled out this massive orange-brown tarp, like construction zone orange. Not your typical gear bag. It was folded up. But once they started unrolling it, I realized just how big it was. It took 3 of them just to maneuver it around something on the ground. I couldn't tell what it was at first. The view was partially blocked by a fallen log in one of the trucks, but I could see that they were wrapping something. Something large. And when I say large, I mean bigger than any animal I've seen in the wild up close. It wasn't round like a bear. It wasn't shaped like an elk either. There was a moment when part of it slipped out from under the tarp. Just for a second. It looked wrong, too long, too human. And the weirdest part, they didn't call for help. No radios crackling, no emergency response. Just rangers. Contained, quiet, efficient. Like they'd done this before. I didn't know what to think. My stomach dropped. I honestly thought about pulling out my phone, but I stopped myself. Something about the way they were acting. It felt dangerous. Like if they saw me filming, they'd make sure I didn't leave with it. So I just stood there, watching. And that's when I noticed the thing's foot. Or maybe it was a hand. I'm not sure. I told my wife to keep walking with the kids. Told her I'd catch up in a minute. She looked at me funny, but I just waved it off and hung back by the side of the trail, half behind a tree. From where I was standing, I could still see the edge of the tarp and the figures moving around it. Whatever they had wrapped up, it wasn't small, and it wasn't light. At least 7 or 8 rangers surrounded the thing, and it still took them a few minutes just to figure out how to move it. They kept crouching down, lifting one side, then putting it back down like they were testing the weight. 2 of them started pulling out reinforced straps, not like medical stretchers either. These were the kind of straps you'd use to lift something industrial. I started piecing together just how serious this was when I noticed the vehicle they were loading up. It wasn't a normal park SUV. It looked like a small white box truck, unmarked. Maybe something you'd see used for equipment transport or park maintenance, but I'd never seen one out there before. And the back doors were wide open. It took every one of them, and I mean everyone, to hoist the tarp-wrapped figure up. 2 lifted from the feet, 4 at the middle, 2 at the top, and even then they were straining. I watched one ranger stumble and nearly fall. Whatever they were moving, it had to weigh several hundred pounds, maybe more. And it wasn't rigid either. It sagged in the middle like dead weight, but long, with strange angles. I swear to you, it wasn't shaped like an animal I've ever seen. And when they finally got it to the truck, that's when part of the tarp slipped again. This time I saw something that made my skin crawl. There was dark fur, but not like bear fur. It was thinner, patchier in spots, almost like it had been burned or torn. and then I caught a glimpse of what looked like a jointed arm or leg, too long for any bear, with grayish, leathery skin beneath the fur, and a hand, yes, a hand, partially curled, with thick black nails that looked cracked and split, human-like, but oversized. The rangers didn't even react when the tarp slipped. One of them just yanked it back into place and gave a sharp nod, like this had to be finished quickly. And not once, did they look up to see if anyone was watching. It was like they assumed the trail had been cleared. They shut the truck doors with a loud metallic bang, locked them tight, and 2 rangers climbed into the cab while the others dispersed. A couple of the vehicles peeled off right behind it like an escort. I stood there behind the tree, frozen. I didn't know if I should tell someone, or just forget the whole thing ever happened. And the worst part, I don't think it was dead, because when they lifted it, I swear I saw the tarp move on its own. With everything going on at Yellowstone lately, all the rumors, the animal migrations, even the talk about the supervolcano possibly erupting, it's hard to know what's real and what's just noise. Maybe this is just another wild story. Maybe someone's trying to stir up fear. But I'll say this. If it was something real, something unknown, maybe even a cryptid or undiscovered species, you better believe it wouldn't be paraded around in public. They'd keep it under wraps, quiet, controlled, probably hit it with a tranquilizer and drag it out before anyone could ask questions. And yeah, maybe it was just a bear. But if that's the case, why the tarp? Why the secrecy? Why the unmarked truck? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Jake Turner was a 35-year-old who worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service. He had recently moved to Klamath Falls, Oregon, to study the local elk population in the nearby Fremont-Winema National Forest. On September 15, 2019, Jake set out for a week-long solo research trip deep into the forest. The first 3 days of his expedition were normal. Jake hiked through dense pine forests, set up camera traps, and collected data on elk movements and habitat use. He camped each night in a small tent, falling asleep to the sounds of the forest. On the 4th day, Jake ventured into a particularly secluded area of the forest. The terrain became more rugged, with steep ravines and rocky outcroppings. As he hiked, he noticed something unusual. The forest seemed to change dramatically, although he couldn't pinpoint what exactly was different. By mid-afternoon, Jake reached a small clearing near a babbling creek. He decided to set up camp early, feeling slightly on edge due to the unusual strangeness. As he pitched his tent, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. After setting up camp, Jake pulled out his field journal and began recording his observations from the day. Suddenly, he heard a loud splash from the creek. Assuming it was a large fish or perhaps even an elk cooling off, Jake grabbed his binoculars and carefully approached the water's edge. What he saw through his binoculars made him freeze. Standing knee-deep in the creek about 100 yards upstream was a massive bipedal creature. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown fur, with arms that hung down to its knees. The creature was bent over, appearing to search for something in the water. Could it be a bear standing on its hind legs? No. The proportions were all wrong. A person? Definitely not. Dressed like that, out here, miles from any road or trail. As he wrestled with these thoughts, the creature straightened up and turned in his direction. Jake ducked behind a large boulder, his heart pounding. He waited a few moments before slowly peeking out. The creature was now standing on the bank of the creek, its massive frame silhouetted against the dimming sky. Jake estimated it must weigh at least 800 pounds. Jake didn't know if it had seen him or not. For several minutes, Jake observed the creature as it moved along the creek bank. Its gait was smooth but clearly not human. It would occasionally stop to examine something on the ground or reach up to grab leaves from low-hanging branches. Ultimately, Jake lost sight of the creature. He strained his ears trying to hear any movement, but the forest remained unsettlingly quiet. Eventually, he made his way back to his tent, trying to work through what he had seen. That night, Jake barely slept. He debated packing up and hiking out immediately, but decided against moving through the unfamiliar terrain in the dark. As dawn broke, Jake emerged from his tent, feeling exhausted, scared, and on edge. He scanned the area around his campsite, looking for any signs of the creature's presence. To his amazement, he found a series of large humanoid footprints in the soft soil near the creek. Each print was nearly 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. Jake spent the morning photographing and measuring the footprints. He also collected hair samples he found caught on a nearby tree bark. As a scientist, he knew the importance of gathering as much physical evidence as possible. Throughout the day, Jake remained hyper-vigilant, constantly scanning his surroundings. He didn't see the creature again, but twice he heard powerful vocalizations echoing through the forest, a deep call unlike anything he'd heard before. As his research trip came to an end, Jake hiked back to civilization, his pack now containing potential evidence of an undocumented species. He struggled with how to proceed. Should he report his findings immediately? How could this information impact his career and the scientific community at large? Jake decided to first have the hair samples analyzed privately. He knew that if his encounter was somehow proven true, it would revolutionize our understanding of undiscovered North American wildlife. However, he also recognized the need for caution and further investigation before making any public claims. So, he sent some of the fur off to an independent lab. As he awaited the results of the analysis to come back in, Jake began discreetly researching other reported sightings in the area. He discovered a handful of similar accounts from hikers and campers over the years, though none from fellow scientists. This left him with a mix of validation and frustration. Others had seen something similar, yet there was still no concrete scientific evidence. Several weeks after his return from the trip, Jake finally received the results of the hair analysis. The lab report indicated that the hair samples were unlike any known animal species. This, of course, was no surprise. The DNA analysis also showed similarities to primate genetics, but with significant unexplained variations. The report concluded that the hair came from an unidentified species, but cautioned that contamination or other factors could have affected the results. This information both excited and troubled Jake. On one hand, it provided some validation for his experience. On the other, he knew that these inconclusive results wouldn't be enough to convince the scientific community of the creature's existence. The results basically made it okay for the truth to be dismissed and not believed. Jake decided to keep the results confidential for the time being. He continued his regular work studying elk populations, but devoted his free time to planning a more extensive expedition to the area where he had his encounter. His goal was to recruit another scientist who was open-minded to the possibility of an unknown creature actually living and probably thriving in the forest. Someone who could help him gather more evidence and hopefully catch a glimpse of the creature Jake had encountered. To this day, he is still planning the next stages of heading back there again. Despite his excitement, he ultimately chickens out at the point where he needs to reach out and describe to someone what happened and the help he needs. He promises to follow up with us once there are any future developments. I've been driving trucks for a living since I was 23, and I'm now 52. So that's nearly 30 years on the road now. Mostly I do long-haul routes across the Midwest and Plain states. I'm gone a lot, and my wife says I'm married to the road. Honestly, she's not far off. Over the years, I've seen just about everything you can imagine on these highways. Crazy drivers, nasty accidents, wild animals, you name it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last month on a lonely stretch of I-80 in Nebraska. It was a Tuesday night, or I guess technically early Wednesday morning. I'd left Chicago around noon the day before, heading for a delivery in Salt Lake City. I was pushing hard to make my deadline, trying to get as far as I could within the rules of driving, before I had to stop for my mandatory rest period. The night was pitch black, that kind of darkness you only get out in the middle of nowhere. No moon, no stars, just an endless emptiness beyond my headlights. I hadn't seen another vehicle in what seemed like hours. The only signs of life were the occasional reflective eyes of some animal in the ditch, probably a deer or coyote. I was fighting to stay awake. You know how it goes sometimes. I had the AC blasting frigid cold, The radio cranked up, and I was on my third cup of truck stop coffee. Awful stuff, but it's packed with caffeine. I kept checking my GPS, watching the miles tick by slowly. Just past North Platte, still a long way to go before I could think about stopping. That's when I first noticed something odd in my side mirror. At first, I thought it was seeing things, but I kept seeing this faint glow, way off in the distance behind me. I figured it must be another truck finally catching up, but as I watched, I realized the lights were too high up, way above where they should be for any road vehicle. I figured maybe it was some oversized load or a construction vehicle. Of course, nothing seemed weird just yet, like when you know something is strange but you don't harp on it, because you know there is an explanation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The lights were moving too smoothly, too fast, and they were getting closer. At the time, I felt bad about it, but something about those lights set me on edge. I found myself checking the mirrors more and more often, watching them slowly gain on me. I hated this feeling that something wasn't in my control or understanding. I pushed down a little harder on the accelerator, creeping my speed up bit by bit. The lights kept pace, always staying the same distance behind me, close enough that I should have been able to make out the vehicle, but all I could see were those strange glowing round dots of light. My palms were starting to sweat on the wheel, and I could feel my heart rate picking up. I hated feeling like that. I debated pulling over at the next rest area, but something told me that was a bad idea. Instead, I pushed my rig even faster, going well over the speed limit now. Risky, especially in the dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to put some distance between me and whatever was back there. For maybe 20 minutes, nothing changed. Just me, barreling down the empty highway, and those lights in my mirror. Then things got really weird. It started with my radio. I'd been listening to some late-night talk show, but suddenly it cut out to static. I tried changing stations, but it was all the same, just harsh, grating noise. Then my dashboard lights started to flicker, and I felt the truck shudder like it does sometimes when you hit a strong crosswind. Except there was no wind. The night was dead still. That's when the cab lit up like it was broad daylight. The glow was so bright and sudden that I was momentarily blinded. I instinctively hit the brakes, feeling the truck slow as I blinked furiously, trying to clear my vision. When I could see again, I looked up through the windshield and my mind just stopped. Hovering right over the highway was this massive thing. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was shaped kind of like a flattened diamond or maybe a huge arrowhead. The underside was covered in lights that pulsed and shifted colors in patterns I couldn't begin to understand. I will honestly admit to you that I was terrified. I've never believed in UFOs or any of that stuff, but there was no denying what I was seeing. This wasn't any kind of aircraft I'd ever heard of. It was just hanging there, maybe 100 feet above the road, moving along at the same speed as my truck. My rig was going haywire. Every warning light on the dashboard was flashing, and the engine was making a sound I'd never heard before, a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. The radio was still blasting static, but now it was mixed with weird electronic tones that seemed to pulse in time with the lights on the craft, ship. I don't even know what to call it. I don't know how long it lasted, barely guiding the truck down the empty highway, staring up at this impossible thing above me. Time seemed to lose all meaning. Part of me was wanting to stop, but I figured that stopping would be far worse. So I drove, mile after mile, with this enormous object hovering over me, bathing everything in its strange, shifting light. I kept waiting for something to happen, for it to attack or abduct me, or whatever it is these things are supposed to do. But it just followed. I remember passing a few exit signs, but I couldn't tell you what they said. My entire world had narrowed down to the road ahead and the thing above. I was running on pure adrenaline and terror, hands clenched so tight on the wheel that my knuckles were white. And then, at one point, it was gone. The lights winked out. The radio snapped back to the talk show I'd been listening to, and my dashboard returned to normal. The next thing I remember clearly is pulling into a rest stop. My watch showed it was almost 4 a.m. According to my truck's GPS, I was just east of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Somehow, I'd driven clear across Nebraska without realizing it. My logbook was blank for nearly 2 hours of driving time. I sat there in the parking lot for a long time, engine idling, trying to process what had happened. Did I fall asleep at the wheel? Did I have some kind of waking dream? Or did I really see what I think I saw? I finally worked up the courage to get out and inspect my truck. I don't know what I expected to find. Scorch marks? Alien footprints? But there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just my same old rig, a bit dusty from the road, but otherwise normal. I completed my run to Salt Lake City in a daze. I kept replaying the night over and over in my mind. I've been driving that route for years, and I've never experienced anything like that before or since. I haven't talked about it much. My wife could tell something was bothering me that night on the phone, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How do you tell someone you love that you were just scared to death and don't know what happened to you? It's been eating at me for weeks now. I've looked, and there are plenty of UFO accounts out there, but nothing quite like what I experienced that night. So, in the end, I'm sharing this story because I need to tell someone who might understand, who might have some insight. If anyone out there has experienced something similar or can tell me anything at all, please reach out, because right now, I feel like I'm carrying a secret that's too big for one person to bear alone. I've been meaning to send this for a while, but I couldn't quite figure out how to describe everything that happened. I was biking across Iowa back in early June, taking a multi-week cross-country trip from Ohio to the western states, and I planned to follow a lot of the smaller highways through Iowa because the main interstates just terrify me with all the traffic. Anyway, this particular stretch was on County Road T-38. I'm pretty sure that's the one, heading north out of Sully, Iowa, late at night, maybe approaching 2 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to make it to Grinnell for a cheap motel I found online, even though my phone battery was getting low, and I was feeling that strange combination of excitement and exhaustion that comes after you've been pedaling all day. It was a weird night weather-wise, too. The moon was bright enough that I barely needed my bike's headlight, but the sky was half covered in clouds that would randomly drift over the moon and plunge everything into darkness. The only other lights around were these tiny spots from distant farmhouses and my own reflectors. I remember the field smelled almost sweet, like the corn had just gotten a good watering a few days prior, and the wind was picking up, causing those big cornstalk leaves to rattle like something rummaging through the fields. It was one of the last times on the trip I actually enjoyed the scenery before all this happened. I was maybe 3 or 4 miles outside Sully, heading north, and I saw what looked like roadkill up ahead. I tend to notice stuff like that more now because I had a really bad experience a year ago when I nailed a half-decomposed possum on a morning ride and flew over my handlebars. So I was slowing down, shining my headlight on it to make sure I wouldn't crash again, and I realized that the shape was moving, like actively crawling across the far side of the road. My first thought was that it might be a coyote with mange or something, but then I saw the silhouette. It was tall, or at least very elongated, with these super long limbs. It was practically hugging the ground, but it was definitely bigger than a coyote. My brain flicked to, maybe it's an injured deer, but then I remembered deer have hooves in that bounding shape, and this was something else entirely. The way it moved was unnaturally smooth, almost gliding on all fours. It was crossing from a ditch on the right side over to the left side of the road, and it paused in the middle as if it heard me coming. At that point, the moon came out from behind the clouds, and I got a really good look at it. I have no clue how to describe its face, other than it looked kind of featureless in the moment, maybe pale or gray skin that reflected the moonlight. The eyes. I didn't see any distinct color or pupil, just 2 darker depressions where I'd expect eyes to be. Its limbs were weirdly thin, with joints that bent in ways I can't fully piece together. The best I can say is it looked like a hairless, emaciated figure, but on all fours, if that makes any sense. That moment lasted maybe 3 seconds in real time, but it felt like 5 minutes. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, because whatever this thing was, it was definitely aware of me. It turned its head a little, shifting its posture so that it almost squatted there in the middle of the road. I was so spooked I nearly veered off to the opposite side. Then it bolted across into the left ditch and disappeared into the cornfield. And the rustling from the stalks was brief, just a quick fading sound of leaves brushing against something. After that, there was nothing. No more movement, no yelp, no footsteps. It was just gone. I pulled over, dismounted my bike, and tried to catch my breath. The only thing I could hear was the wind in the corn again. I remember looking down at my hands, and they were trembling. Part of me wanted to investigate, but I kept picturing that elongated shape and those hollow eye sockets. Even thinking about it now makes me unsettled. Like, I've seen weird stuff before at night while riding. Foxes, raccoons, the occasional deer that tries to sprint across the road, but nothing that remotely resembled a humanoid that crawls around like that. I wasted a good 15 minutes just standing there, scanning the field. A truck passed by. I want to say it was a dark green pickup, maybe 5 minutes after, heading southbound, but I didn't flag them down or anything. Some part of me thought, if I tell someone right now, they'll think I'm hallucinating. And I also had that nagging fear that if I started talking to someone, whatever it was might come back. It's irrational, I know, but that's how I felt in the moment. Eventually, I forced myself to get back on the bike and keep riding until I reached Grinnell. I didn't move very fast at first. I kept feeling like something was creeping along the ditch, watching me. But after a couple miles, I guess my adrenaline died down a bit, and I just concentrated on making it to the motel. I checked in around 3 a.m., though the front desk guy told me check-in usually ended earlier. Guess they took pity on a sweaty, frantic cyclist. Or maybe business is slow on a weekday at that time. Anyway, as soon as I dropped my stuff in the room, I basically collapsed on the bed. The next day, I had a bad chain slip that cost me about an hour of repairs. I was almost relieved, because it gave me an excuse to stay in Grinnell longer and avoid riding at night again. I even managed to grab some groceries at a Hy-Vee to calm my nerves. Sometimes just doing normal day-to-day stuff helps me shrug off the bizarre. I did spend an embarrassing amount of time looking at the edges of the cornfields as I left for the next leg of my trip, but I never saw anything else like that. Iowa is typically so calm and unassuming, you know? Everyone's pretty nice, the countryside is serene, and then this happens. I realized I hadn't told anyone in person about it because it sounds absolutely bonkers,